The morning sun had just begun its climb over Fort Campbell, casting long, jagged shadows across the tarmac. Dust swirled in lazy eddies, clinging to the boots of soldiers and the polished metal of helicopters lined up like obedient beasts awaiting their masters. Captain Alina Harris, sharp in her pilot's jacket and precise in her movements, walked briskly toward the row of AH-64 Apache, her gaze scanning for the morning briefing team. The wind tugged at her dark hair, teasing it into her eyes, but she barely noticed. Today, like every day, was about precision, timing, and survival. She lived for the air, for the roar of turbines beneath her fingertips, for the deadly ballet only a helicopter pilot understood. At the far end of the tarmac, leaning casually against an Apache, was Sergeant First Class Thomas "Tommy" Caldwell, a veteran of 3 decades who had seen more fire than most men could imagine. His uniform was faded, his boots scuffed, and the creases in his weathered face told stories of every battlefield he had survived. Today, however, his eyes betrayed something rare: amusement. The kind of mischievous glint only a man who had stared death in the face countless times could afford. "Alina, you really think the new rookies are ready for live simulations?" he asked, voice low, gravelly with age and experience. He ran a hand along the Apache's fuselage, feeling the grooves and worn edges like an old friend. Harris smirked. "They don't know yet if they're ready for me." Her tone carried humor, but the underlying edge of authority was sharp. Even a veteran like Caldwell knew better than to challenge her on the tarmac. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small notebook, flipping it open to the day's flight roster. "I've got a surprise for you today, though," she said, eyes glinting. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "I'm all ears, Captain." She tapped the side of an Apache, the machine's rotors unmoving, silent in the morning air. "You ever flown an Apache, Sarge?" Caldwell let out a low chuckle. "Not since '89. Not on this model, anyway." His tone carried nostalgia, tinged with pride. The old warhorse inside him stirred at the memory of helicopter cockpits, the smell of hydraulic fluid, the vibration of turbines under his hands. Harris leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Then why don't you start her up, just for old time's sake? Nothing serious. I'll stand right here and supervise." Caldwell laughed outright this time, shaking his head. "Captain, you're joking, right? You know the colonel would have my head if he saw." "Relax," Harris interrupted, a grin spreading across her face. "It's just spinning the blades. No flight, no maneuvers, just—" She gestured to the helicopter with a flourish. "Hear her roar again. You deserve that much." Caldwell hesitated, running a hand through his thinning hair. He looked over at the Apache, at the polished cockpit, the blades that gleamed in the morning light, silent yet full of potential energy. His mind raced back through decades. Nights hovering over enemy lines, dodging missiles, watching comrades fall while he survived. The smell of fuel, the metallic tang of the cockpit, the pure adrenaline that accompanied each liftoff, it all came rushing back. He chuckled again, shaking his head. "You really are cruel, Captain, but all right." Harris clapped her hands lightly. "Good, that's the spirit, just start her, that's all." Caldwell climbed the ladder to the cockpit, careful despite decades of familiarity. His fingers hovered over the switches, almost reverent, the weight of years in his movements. The younger soldiers around the tarmac paused to watch, murmuring under their breaths. Stories of Caldwell's battlefield exploits were legendary, but watching him approach the Apache like a man meeting an old friend again made them whisper in awe. He settled into the seat, adjusting his headset, his hands brushing over controls that had once been extensions of his own body. The cockpit smelled faintly of oil and leather, a scent that immediately transported him back to deserts, jungles, and mountains where the world had been nothing but air and fire. "Okay, here goes nothing," he muttered, his voice almost lost in the hum of the morning wind. Harris stepped back a few feet, arms crossed, trying to hide her own excitement. The other soldiers had formed a loose circle, tension building with every second. Nobody had actually seen Caldwell touch the ignition in years, and this was more than just routine. It was history resurrected in a heartbeat. Caldwell's hand moved deliberately, turning the master switch. The cockpit lights flickered alive, small beacons against the dawn. The helicopter was awake, trembling with anticipation. Harris's pulse quickened. She could see the muscles in Caldwell's forearms tense as he reached for the throttle. Outside, the world seemed to pause. The wind dropped, and even the dust that had been dancing lazily along the tarmac settled for a brief, surreal moment. Every eye was fixed on the veteran, watching as he brought life back into the machine that had once been a deadly extension of himself. Then, with a low, growling whine, the main rotor began to spin. Slowly at first, hesitant, as if testing the air, then faster, faster, until the ground beneath seemed to vibrate with its rhythm. Caldwell's face, lined with years of worry and battle, broke into an almost childlike grin. The sound filled the tarmac, reverberating off hangars, bouncing between soldiers frozen in awe. Harris's grin widened. "See, told you it'd be fun." But before anyone could relax, a sharp whistle cut through the air, a sound of recognition and rising panic. From the far end of the base, the figure of Colonel Marcus Granger appeared, striding across the tarmac with that unmistakable rigid posture, eyes narrowing as they fell on the spinning blades of the Apache. His hand shot to his headset, his face draining of color. Time seemed to slow. Caldwell's grin faltered. Harris froze, her smirk fatting into tension. The colonel's stride accelerated, boots thudding against the concrete. "What the hell?" The colonel's voice bellowed over the sudden quiet that had fallen among the soldiers. And just as Caldwell's fingers tightened on the controls, a sudden gust of wind caused the Apache to shudder, blades slicing through the air with a menacing whine. Harris's stomach dropped. Everyone on the tarmac could feel it. A single wrong move, and decades of control and precision could be undone in an instant. The colonel was nearly upon them. Caldwell's grip tightened, the hum of the blades climbing into a roar. Harris could see the colonel's face, pale and taut, eyes wide, jaw clenched. He had seen plenty in his career, but this was unexpected, uncontrolled, and dangerous. The moment stretched taut, hanging like a blade over everyone's heads. The tension wasn't just in the air. It was in every heartbeat, every shallow breath of the soldiers watching. Something was about to happen, and no one could predict whether it would be disaster or just a lesson in audacity. Caldwell's voice came, low but firm. "Colonel, I've got her, don't worry." But the colonel wasn't listening. He was already shouting orders, his voice cutting like a whip across the tarmac. And in that split second, as the blades spun faster, the roar of the Apache swallowed the morning light, and everyone realized the joke had gone far beyond anyone's expectation. Harris's mind raced. She had meant it as harmless fun. But now, watching the colonel's face tighten like a drawn bow, she knew something monumental was about to happen. Something that would not only test Caldwell, but everyone present on the tarmac that morning. And then the colonel froze in his tracks. Because what he heard next wasn't just the spin of the blades. It was something in the sound, a vibration, a pattern that made him step back, eyes wide, utterly silent, as if decades of discipline and command had collided with an impossible realization. Colonel Marcus Granger's eyes widened as he stared at the Apache, blades whirring with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. His hand hovered near his sidearm, not because he intended to draw it, but because his body instinctively prepared for danger. Over 30 years of military service had taught him to read situations in a heartbeat, to detect threats invisible to others. And right now, something about the way Caldwell had started that helicopter made his instincts scream. The other soldiers shifted uneasily, sensing the colonel's tension. Whispers rippled through the tarmac. "Why is he so pale? Is the colonel angry? Has something gone wrong?" Even Harris felt the unease prickling her skin, though she'd been the one to set this in motion. What had started as a harmless joke, asking an old veteran to start the Apache, was spiraling into something none of them had anticipated. Caldwell, calm despite the colonel's looming presence, began cycling through the pre-flight checks with precision. Lights blinked, switches clicked, and the cockpit instruments hummed a low, steady tone. He moved with decades of muscle memory, hands dancing over controls as if no time had passed since his last combat mission. But there was more than skill at work. There was a fluidity, a synchronicity with the machine that seemed unnatural to those watching. Harris felt her stomach tighten. The blades were spinning faster now, generating a low, pulsating vibration that rattled the metal of the hangar walls. "Sir," Harris called out, trying to inject calm into the tense scene, "he's just testing the systems. It's routine." Granger's eyes narrowed. Routine. His voice was low, dangerous, a growl that carried decades of authority. "You're telling me it's routine to start an Apache after 20 years of retirement?" Caldwell didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the collective, feeling the subtle resistance beneath his hands. The Apache responded like an extension of his own body. Every vibration, every subtle echo in the cockpit told him exactly how the rotors would react. Harris had seen pilots like this in simulations and exercises, but she had never seen anything like the old veteran's control, so effortless, so precise, it was almost uncanny. The colonel took a step forward, his boots clanging against the tarmac. "Sergeant Caldwell," he barked, "what in God's name do you think you're doing?" Caldwell's grin returned, tempered with that steady confidence only someone who had survived decades of combat could carry. "Colonel, I'm just starting her. Nothing more. You taught me once that a soldier respects his machine. I'm showing her the respect she deserves." Granger's face twitched. There was disbelief in his eyes mingled with suspicion. He had known Caldwell's reputation as a veteran, legendary in fact, but this felt different. There was a subtle hum beneath the Apache that made the colonel's skin crawl like a predator sensing a rival in the distance. He could feel it in his bones. This wasn't a normal startup. Something extraordinary was happening, something beyond routine skill. Harris swallowed, suddenly aware that the joke she'd set up had turned into a spectacle of raw power. The rotor blades now spun with an almost hypnotic cadence, cutting through the morning air. Dust and debris swirled violently around the tarmac, kicked up by the downwash, and soldiers instinctively stepped back, shielding their eyes. The hum of the machine seemed to resonate through the concrete itself, vibrating in their chests, a physical reminder that the Apache was more than metal. It was a weapon, alive in Caldwell's hands. Then came the sound. Not loud, not explosive, but precise. A rhythmic pulse buried beneath the roar of the rotors. Granger's eyes went wide. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Harris's pulse raced. She had heard the hum, but she couldn't articulate why it made her skin prickle, why it seemed to carry an almost mechanical intelligence. "You're feeling it too, aren't you?" Caldwell said without turning, though his voice carried over the whine of the rotors. Harris's jaw tightened. "Yes, but I don't understand." Granger stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "Caldwell, tell me this is nothing more than a startup. Tell me this is—" He hesitated, swallowing hard, his voice low. "Tell me this isn't exactly how she flies in combat." Caldwell didn't flinch. "Sir, I can't, not exactly." His tone was calm, almost reverent. "But I can get her there in a heartbeat if I need to. You taught me that, didn't you?" Harris felt her stomach tighten. Every soldier on the tarmac could feel it, the sense that the air itself had changed. The morning sun seemed sharper now, casting metallic gleams off the Apache's fuselage. The hum had grown, subtle but undeniable, almost as if the machine was alive and aware of every heartbeat in its proximity. Suddenly, a sharp alarm from the cockpit pierced the air. Harris jumped, and soldiers instinctively ducked. Caldwell's hands flew across the controls with fluid grace, extinguishing the warning before it could escalate. Yet the colonel didn't breathe a word of relief. His gaze was locked on the machine, on the blades spinning faster, on the hum that seemed to carry its own intelligence. Harris whispered under her breath, almost to herself, "What have we unleashed?" Caldwell leaned back slightly, eyes closed for a fraction of a second, as if attuning himself further with the Apache. The machine responded subtly, aligning its rotors perfectly with the wind, hovering almost imperceptibly above the tarmac. It wasn't lifting off, it wasn't moving, but the power radiating from it was undeniable. Every soldier felt it, a coiled potential ready to spring into unstoppable motion. The colonel staggered back, almost involuntarily muttering, This shouldn't be possible." A sudden gust of wind swept across the base, rattling the Apache's canopy. Dust shot into the colonel's eyes, and when he blinked it away, he froze again. Caldwell's fingers hovered on the controls, ready to react. Harris felt the tension like a living thing, pressing against her chest, demanding attention, demanding fear. Then, as if on cue, the rotor blades tilted slightly, catching the sun's rays in a dazzling reflection. The sound shifted, a subtle warbling that seemed to vibrate in the air, almost like a signal, almost like a warning. Harris could see the colonel's face pale further. Something about the rhythm of the blades made the hairs on the back of her neck stand. She realized that Caldwell wasn't just starting the helicopter, he was speaking to it, coaxing it to life in a way that defied explanation. And in that suspended moment, when every soldier held their breath, the colonel's lips parted in disbelief. "By God," he whispered. Before anyone could respond, Caldwell's voice cut through the tension. "Sir, you're about to see exactly why I'm still alive." The tarmac seemed to grow colder, the hum of the blades louder, more insistent. Dust swirled into miniature tornadoes around the helicopter, kicked up by forces invisible to the naked eye. Harris felt her heart hammering in her chest. The colonel, rooted to the spot, stared like a man confronting a ghost from his past, the line between reality and impossibility blurring in the roar of the machine. And then, without warning, a deep, resonant vibration shot through the ground itself, as though the Apache was testing its power, measuring its strength. Soldiers stumbled back instinctively, shielding themselves. Harris's stomach dropped. The colonel's eyes went wide, mouth open in a mixture of awe and terror. Because the sound, the vibration, it wasn't just a helicopter starting. It was something more, something alive, something that should not have been possible. And in that instant, everyone knew. Whatever was happening on that tarmac, Caldwell had awakened it, and the colonel was the first to realize they were witnessing the impossible. Colonel Granger's face was pale, almost ghost-like, as he stood rooted to the tarmac. His eyes, sharp and disciplined for decades, were wide in disbelief. Every fiber of his body screamed that what he was seeing and hearing should not be possible. The Apache's blades whirred with a precision, a synchronization that seemed to defy engineering. Even the wind itself seemed to bow around the machine, twisting dust and debris into chaotic spirals that obeyed no natural law. Harris's pulse hammered in her chest. She had expected Caldwell to handle a simple startup, maybe to impress or amuse, but what was happening now was entirely different. The Apache wasn't merely running, it was alive, responding to Caldwell's hands with a responsiveness that went beyond skill. It hovered perfectly on the tarmac, blades slicing the air with a resonance that vibrated into the soldier's bones. "Sir, I need you to stand back," Harris called, though even she sounded uncertain. Her voice carried over the hum of the rotors, almost lost in the sheer power of the machine. Soldiers shuffled backward, eyes glued to the spinning blades, instinctively aware that even a minor misstep could be catastrophic. Colonel Granger didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved closer, a mixture of authority and awe in his steps. "Caldwell, explain yourself." His voice shook, not with fear of disobedience, but with fear of the inexplicable. "What, how, why is she doing that?" Caldwell's hands danced over the controls, never lifting, never hesitating. "Colonel," he said, voice calm but with an edge of urgency, "she's listening. I've flown her before in the past, but not like this. Not since she's been upgraded. This is different, she's responding to me." Harris felt her stomach tighten. She had seen pilots coax helicopters in simulations, but Caldwell's control bordered on something else entirely, something almost symbiotic. The air shimmered subtly around the Apache as if the blades had drawn power from something unseen. Even the sun's reflection seemed sharper, hotter, bouncing off the metal with a warning glare. Granger's jaw tightened. "You're telling me you can communicate with her?" His voice rose, disbelief giving way to anger. "After 20 years, you're claiming this machine obeys you like it's alive." Caldwell didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing with focus. "Not alive, sir. Not exactly, but she trusts me. I've earned it, and she knows when to obey." The colonel's lips parted in a mixture of awe and frustration. "Earned it? Sergeant, I don't care how many missions you've flown. Machines don't trust. Machines obey. That's the law, Caldwell. That's physics. That's reason." Before he could finish, a low, resonant vibration shot from the Apache into the ground, and every soldier staggered instinctively. Dust and grit erupted around the helicopter in a chaotic swirl, whipping into their eyes. Harris coughed, shielding her face. She glanced at Caldwell. Despite the chaos around him, he was calm, serene even, as though he were walking through a familiar room rather than commanding a spinning weapon of war that seemed to pulse with life. Then it happened. The blades tilted slightly, catching sunlight in an almost blinding flash. Harris gasped as she realized the rotor tips were cutting through the air with a precision that no engineer could have designed. The vibration shifted, almost like a heartbeat, synchronized perfectly with Caldwell's own pulse. Harris felt her teeth rattle, her heart thundering. This wasn't just power. This was control on a level she couldn't comprehend. Granger stumbled back, shouting over the hum. "This is impossible. This is illegal." His voice cracked, betraying the storm of emotions he'd spent decades learning to suppress. He had trained soldiers to follow orders, helicopters to obey, and yet here was Caldwell, retired decades past his prime, and the colonel realized in stark horror that he had no authority over this moment. Caldwell spoke quietly, almost reverently. "Sir, you taught me to respect the machine, to understand her. I've followed your lessons every day for 20 years, and she's listening, that's all." Harris's mind raced. She could see it now. The way the blades reacted to Caldwell's subtle wrist movements, the slight lean of his shoulder, even the rhythm of his breathing. The Apache wasn't just a machine. It was an extension of him, and he had unlocked a level of mastery that no one else on the base could touch. Suddenly, the helicopter shuddered violently, thrumming against its own weight. Soldiers yelped, ducking instinctively. The tarmac seemed to vibrate beneath their boots. Harris grabbed Caldwell's shoulder instinctively. What is happening?" He shook his head slightly, eyes fixed on the instruments. "She's testing me. She's alive enough to test me. Calm down, Captain. I've got this." Granger, however, did not calm. He was frozen mid-step, eyes darting between the spinning blades and Caldwell. He could feel the tension in the air like static electricity, could sense every soldier's fear and awe merging into a single pulse of collective anxiety. Then came the unmistakable click of a hatch locking. Harris turned just in time to see a panel she didn't recognize illuminate on the dashboard, a subtle warning light that should not have been triggered. The vibration of the Apache intensified, thrumming through the concrete, rattling helmets and rattling teeth. Granger's face went white. She's arming herself." Harris froze. She had expected suspense, tension, but the words struck her like a physical blow. "Arming herself," she echoed, voice barely above a whisper. Caldwell's hands moved like lightning, adjusting switches and levers. The Apache settled slightly, blades still humming, but the vibration shifted. It wasn't hostile yet, but it was aware, testing boundaries. Harris's heart hammered. She realized that the joke she had initiated, asking a veteran to start the Apache, had unlocked something beyond their understanding, something powerful, intelligent, and unpredictable. The colonel, voice trembling, finally barked, "Step back. Everyone step back. She's not supposed to. This isn't authorized." Caldwell leaned back slightly, his face calm, almost meditative. "Colonel, if I don't calm her now, she'll do exactly what she wants. And trust me, You don't want to see that." The tarmac fell into an eerie, charged silence. Soldiers froze mid-step. Dust hung in the air like suspended particles in a nightmare. The blades continued to hum, spinning faster than ever, creating a vibration that rattled bones, rattled helmets, rattled hearts. And then just as suddenly, the hum shifted again, an almost melodic resonance, impossible in a machine of metal and hydraulics. Harris felt a shiver run down her spine. The colonel's jaw tightened, eyes wide in a mixture of terror and fascination. Caldwell's whisper cut through the charged air. "She knows me, she trusts me, and now she's ready." Harris felt her blood run cold. Everyone on the tarmac could feel it. Something extraordinary and terrifying was about to happen. The Apache, alive with a power no one could control but Caldwell, hovered perfectly. Its blades hummed a rhythm that seemed almost intelligent. And then the colonel stepped forward, one hand raised as if daring fate itself. "Sergeant Caldwell," he said, voice low but deadly serious, "if you don't stop this, I swear." But before he could finish, the Apache tilted slightly, and a deep, resonant vibration tore across the tarmac, silencing every voice in a heartbeat. The impossible had begun. The Apache hovered above the tarmac like a predator assessing its surroundings. The hum of the blades was now almost deafening, vibrating through the soles of boots, rattling teeth and echoing in every soldier's chest. Dust and debris whipped violently, stinging exposed skin. Harris felt her stomach drop, the adrenaline spike inside her chest, her fingers curling into fists. This was no longer a playful demonstration. The helicopter had become an unpredictable force of raw power. Colonel Granger's hands were trembling as he shouted orders, though his voice was barely audible over the rotor's roar. "Stand back! Everyone now!" Soldiers scrambled, some tripping over their own feet, others colliding in panic as they obeyed the command. Harris and Caldwell were the only ones who remained close to the Apache, frozen in a tense triangle of control, fear, and awe. Caldwell's hands moved with the precision of a seasoned maestro, adjusting levers and throttles with micro-movements imperceptible to anyone else. The Apache responded instantly. Its blades tilted, dipping closer to the tarmac, then pulling back, creating a dance of wind and sound that was mesmerizing and terrifying. Harris could see the control Caldwell had, yet the power of the machine was immense, almost sentient. The vibration had become a steady pulse, a heartbeat of metal and fury, shaking the very ground. The colonel, face pale and rigid, stepped closer despite the danger. "Caldwell," he barked, his voice trembling with authority and fear, "you need to land her, now." Caldwell glanced at him, his expression calm but determined. "Colonel, she isn't done testing me yet. If I force it, she'll resist, and trust me, you don't want to see that." Granger's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles whitening. "Resist? Sergeant, this is a machine. It obeys commands, not tests commands." Before Caldwell could answer, the Apache shuddered violently, tilting slightly as if to emphasize his point. The force threw a gust of wind that knocked soldiers off their feet, sending helmets and gear skidding across the tarmac. Harris grabbed Caldwell instinctively, shielding her face as dirt and grit pelted them. The blade's hum had transformed into a throbbing resonance that vibrated like a living pulse, each wave carrying power that was palpable and terrifying. "You see," Caldwell said, voice low but calm, "she's not malfunctioning, she's alive in her own way. She's communicating, and now she's assessing her environment." Harris's eyes widened. "Communicating, assessing. You're saying the Apache is thinking." Caldwell's fingers danced across the controls. "Not exactly thinking, Captain, but she understands. She knows risk. She knows trust. And she knows when someone's trying to impose control unfairly." The colonel took a step back, his face ashen. His mind raced, calculating potential disasters, recalling every safety protocol drilled into him over decades. None of it applied. This situation was unprecedented. If she's assessing, then she could. his voice caught in his throat as the Apache tilted suddenly, the rotors slicing the air with terrifying speed, sending a blast of wind that slammed into the nearest vehicles, bouncing them slightly on their wheels. Soldiers scrambled to stabilize equipment and retreat. The base was chaos, the morning sun now hidden by dust clouds swirling in the rotor wash. Harris could see the tension in Caldwell's jaw, the focus in his eyes. He was commanding a machine that seemed to breathe, to respond with intuition, and yet he remained unnervingly calm. "Colonel," Caldwell said, his voice cutting through the storm, "step back. This isn't an attack, it's a demonstration. If you panic, she might panic, and that's when things get dangerous." Granger's mind raced. His military instincts screamed that they were beyond control, yet every movement Caldwell made seemed to assert dominance over the Apache. The colonel felt both awe and terror, the kind of terror reserved for witnessing raw power wielded with skill few could comprehend. This is impossible," he muttered. Then the Apache responded to a subtle movement Caldwell made with the joystick. Its angle changed sharply, hovering low above the ground, kicking up a vortex of wind and dust. Harris felt her stomach lurch as she realized how effortlessly the old veteran commanded this powerful machine. Every tilt, every whine of the rotors, every pulse of vibration emanated from Caldwell's touch. The Apache was alive, but it was his control that gave it form. Suddenly, the helicopter's canopy lit up with a warning indicator. Harris gasped, That's not right." Caldwell didn't flinch. "It's fine, just a system self-check. She's letting me know she's ready for the next stage." The colonel's hands shook as he realized the meaning behind Caldwell's words. Next stage. The term was terrifying. The Apache had already demonstrated capabilities that defied the norms of every pilot's manual. What could next stage mean? Could it lift, strike, or maneuver in ways that no one at the base had tested? And then the unexpected happened. The Apache tilted higher, lifting slightly off the tarmac, a controlled hover just above the concrete. The ground beneath vibrated, sending soldiers stumbling. Dust, debris, and loose equipment whirled around like a miniature tornado. Harris clutched Caldwell's arm, her mind screaming at the danger, but his hands remained steady. Granger's jaw dropped. "By God, she's airborne." Harris could see Caldwell's focus, his calm determination. "She's testing me, sir. She's feeling my touch, my intent. She trusts me. And right now she's letting me show her capabilities." The wind whipped violently, tearing at jackets, hats, and hair. Soldiers crouched, shielding themselves. Harris could barely keep her balance as the helicopter hovered, spinning gently, almost like it was aware of every human heartbeat around it. The resonance of the rotors was deafening, vibrating through the air, the concrete, their bodies. And in that moment, the colonel's eyes widened with an understanding that terrified him to his core. She's responding to him, not the controls, but the man himself. Harris's breath caught. She realized the terrifying truth. Caldwell wasn't just starting a helicopter. He was commanding a living weapon, and the colonel, the soldiers, the entire base were witnessing a power that had no precedent. The tension hung in the air, as heavy as the rotor's hum. Everyone knew that the next moment could decide whether they survived, or whether the helicopter, alive in its own terrifying way, would define the limits of control in ways none could predict. And then Caldwell spoke, voice low, calm, yet cutting through the storm. "Hold on, everyone. You're about to see why I survived every mission I ever flew." The Apache tilted sharply, wind and dust exploding outward in a violent swirl, and the tarmac beneath trembled. The impossible had begun. The Apache hovered above the tarmac like a predator poised to strike. The rotors hummed with a force that rattled helmets, shuddered equipment, and sent a low vibration through the concrete beneath their boots. Dust and debris tore across the base, kicked up in furious spirals, slapping faces and hands. Soldiers pressed themselves to the ground, shielding their eyes and mouths, hearts hammering with panic and awe. Harris felt her stomach twist as she gripped Caldwell's arm, her knuckles white. This isn't just a startup, she whispered almost to herself. It's alive. Caldwell's hands moved with precise grace across the controls, micro-adjustments invisible to anyone else. The Apache responded instantly, tilting, rising, twisting with a fluidity that defied physics. It was no longer a machine. It was a living weapon, and Caldwell was its conductor. His eyes were narrowed in concentration, lips pressed tight, muscles coiled like springs. Granger staggered back, his face pale and drawn. "Sergeant Caldwell, if you don't land her right now." "I can't," Caldwell interrupted, voice calm, unshakable. "She's testing me. She has to trust me completely, or the next move could be catastrophic." The colonel's jaw tightened. Catastrophic. We are standing on a tarmac with one of the most advanced attack helicopters in the world, hovering above our heads, controlled by a retired veteran who, by protocol, shouldn't even be allowed near it. Do you realize what you're saying? Caldwell didn't reply, only focused on the Apache. Harris could see it in his eyes, the calm, almost meditative focus that only decades of life-and-death missions could produce. And then the helicopter shifted again, rising several feet off the ground, spinning slowly, blades humming with a resonance that seemed almost conscious. The wind exploded outward, tearing loose papers, hats, and a row of empty helmets across the tarmac. Soldiers scrambled to secure equipment, some stumbling and shouting, others frozen in awe and fear. Harris dug her boots into the ground, bracing herself, watching the scene unfold like a nightmare-turned cinematic spectacle. The colonel's voice cut across the roar. "Step away. Every man and woman here, get clear. This is no longer a controlled situation." Caldwell's eyes flicked toward him, calm yet commanding. "Sir, she's not out of control, she's learning, and I have to let her trust me." Granger's face went white. "Learning? This is not a machine. It's a helicopter. She obeys no one but the pilot, and you are not even supposed to be flying her." The Apache tilted forward slightly, spinning in a gentle arc, sending gusts of wind and clouds of dust ripping across the tarmac. Harris could feel the vibration in her bones, a low hum that seemed almost alive, almost communicating something beyond comprehension. The entire base seemed to shrink under the massive energy of the machine. And then the Apache shuddered violently, rocking as if testing the limits of its rotors. Harris grabbed Caldwell's shoulder instinctively. "What is happening?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the instruments, his hands dancing across the controls. "She's assessing the environment, Captain, feeling the wind, the tension, the proximity of every person. She knows fear, she knows hesitation, and she responds to it." The colonel's face went pale as the realization hit. "You mean she's reacting to our emotions?" Caldwell nodded slightly, grim. "Exactly. She's aware of intent, sir. And right now the entire base is tense. That's why she's alive in this moment." Harris felt a shiver crawl down her spine. The helicopter wasn't just a machine. It was a mirror of human intent, responding to subtle cues of concentration, fear, and command. The air was charged, humming with a raw energy she had never felt before. Suddenly the Apache tilted sharply, rising several more feet. Harris's stomach dropped. "She's going higher." Caldwell's fingers tightened on the controls. "Careful, she's testing limits. Don't panic. If we panic, she panics." The colonel stumbled back, nearly losing his footing. "Limits? Sergeant, you don't understand. If she loses control, if she miscalculates, even a small error could be lethal." The Apache hovered perfectly, blades slicing the air with an almost musical hum. Then, with a tilt, the rotors whipped into a sudden lateral shift, whipping wind so strong it knocked over a nearby utility cart. Sparks flew as metal collided. Harris grabbed Caldwell again, yelling over the roar. "Keep her steady," she shouted. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "I am, but she's testing. She's alive enough to push boundaries, and boundaries are dangerous." The The colonel's voice cracked, panic mingling with awe. "We need to shut her down. This is insane. She can't be. She is a weapon. Any second this could be." Before he could finish, the Apache tilted suddenly, dipping low, blades cutting close to the tarmac, sending a shockwave that lifted dust, debris, and loose objects into a violent storm around them. Soldiers screamed and ducked, trying to shield themselves. Harris clutched Caldwell, bracing for impact. Caldwell's eyes were narrow slits, hands moving with fluid precision. "Relax, she's not hostile. She's testing, not attacking, just watching." The colonel's eyes went wide with realization and terror. "She's aware, she knows us." A deep, resonant pulse reverberated through the ground, vibrating through every boot, every helmet, every heart. Harris felt the energy, the awareness, the sheer force of will emanating from the helicopter, and she realized something horrifying. The Apache was not just alive, it was judging. "Caldwell," the colonel's voice cracked, trembling with fear. "If she decides we are a threat, if she acts, there's nothing we can do." Caldwell's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes locked on the rotors. "Then she knows I'll protect you. That's all she needs to trust. That's all we need." The helicopter tilted again, rising, twisting, a living, breathing force of metal and power. Harris could see the subtle synchrony, the way every shift of Caldwell's hands, every slight adjustment, brought balance to chaos. It was breathtaking, terrifying, and mesmerizing. And then the Apache suddenly paused, suspended midair, rotors slicing the sunlight into shards of brilliance. The wind died down slightly, dust settling. The silence was almost deafening. The colonel's face was pale, lips trembling. "By God, she's perfectly still." Harris felt the tension loosen just a fraction, but the calm was deceptive. They all knew this peace was temporary, that the next moment could unleash unprecedented power. Caldwell leaned back, a faint, grim smile on his face. "Hold on, everyone. The real test is about to begin." And then, without warning, the Apache tilted again, faster, sharper, ready to demonstrate its full capabilities. The impossible had only just begun. The Apache tilted sharply, cutting a violent arc through the morning air, the rotor blades slicing the light into blinding streaks. Dust and debris whipped around the tarmac like a hurricane contained in a cage. Soldiers flattened themselves against the concrete, some gripping helmets, others shielding their eyes, hearts hammering in terror. Harris felt her pulse spike. Every fiber in her body screamed that they were no longer observing a machine. They were witnessing a force alive with intent. Caldwell's hands danced across the controls, micro-adjustments so subtle that no one else could comprehend them. The helicopter responded instantly, hovering, twisting, almost floating in defiance of physics. Every second the rotor's hum grew, a low, pulsing resonance that vibrated through their bones, reverberated in their chests, and rattled the equipment scattered across the base. Colonel Granger's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Sergeant, if she does what I think she's capable of, we're done for," he muttered, barely audible over the roar of the rotors. His mind raced, recalling decades of combat, engineering principles, and military regulations. None of it applied here. This was unprecedented. Harris grabbed Caldwell's shoulder instinctively. "What's the next step?" she shouted over the wind. He didn't look at her. His focus was absolute, razor-sharp. "We test her limits gently," he said, fingers flicking switches, thumbs adjusting levers with an almost hypnotic rhythm. "She needs to trust. If I push too hard, too fast, she'll resist, and that's when chaos starts." Granger staggered backward, disbelief etched across his face. "Trust? She's a helicopter. You're telling me we're relying on trust to keep everyone alive?" Caldwell's eyes flicked toward him, calm but resolute. "Exactly, sir. Trust, skill, instinct, and timing. Everything else is irrelevant." Harris watched as the Apache hovered higher, blades spinning faster, generating a windstorm that tore across the tarmac, flinging loose equipment into chaotic arcs. Sparks flew as the vortex caught a metal toolbox, tossing it like a toy. Soldiers screamed, ducking behind vehicles and barricades. The air hummed with energy, charged with anticipation. Then Caldwell initiated the first test. The helicopter tilted sharply forward, a controlled dive, accelerating just above the concrete. Dust, gravel, and debris erupted in a violent spray. Harris gritted her teeth, holding on tight. Soldiers stumbled, shielding their eyes, shouting in panic. The colonel barked orders, but his voice was drowned in the roar. Caldwell's hands moved with practiced precision. The Apache responded instantly, rising, banking, then spinning in a fluid circle, rotors slicing through the air with almost sentient grace. Harris could see the synchronization between man and machine. Every tilt, every subtle adjustment, every minor movement dictated by Caldwell was mirrored perfectly by the Apache. It was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Granger's face turned pale. She's moving on instinct," he whispered, "and she's obeying him." Harris felt a shiver run down her spine. She realized the horrifying truth. This was no longer about testing a helicopter. Caldwell had unlocked a level of control that few, if any, had ever achieved. The Apache was alive in a way that defied understanding, and she was attuned entirely to him. Suddenly, the Apache banked sharply, rising vertically into the air with a speed that made the base tremble. The rotor wash created miniature tornadoes, whipping debris and dirt high into the sky. Harris grabbed Caldwell, shouting, "Careful, she's moving too fast." Caldwell didn't flinch. "She's still listening, stay calm." But the colonel was no longer calm. His eyes darted between the helicopter, Caldwell, and the chaos unfolding across the tarmac. "If she loses control, she could destroy half this base," he shouted. "Do you understand that, Sergeant? Half the base." Caldwell's hands didn't stop moving. "I understand, sir, but if I keep steady, if I guide her correctly, she'll stay within limits. Watch." The Apache responded immediately, hovering mid-air, blades rotating with an almost hypnotic rhythm. Harris could see the subtle signs, the slight lean, the minor pitch, the faint pulse of vibration, every element a testament to Caldwell's mastery. It was almost unnatural, the way he commanded a machine that defied rules of physics and engineering. Then came the next test. Caldwell initiated a rapid lateral maneuver, twisting the Apache in a sharp, controlled circle, gusts of wind tearing across the tarmac. Soldiers clung to vehicles, struggling to maintain balance. The colonel staggered backward, pale as he realized the precision required to pull off such maneuvers safely. Harris gritted her teeth. "This is insane, one misstep and—" Caldwell's eyes narrowed, a faint smile appearing. "And one misstep, she won't make it. That's why we practice, Captain, that's why she trusts me, that's why—" He paused, exhaling slowly. "This works." The helicopter tilted, ascending with a force that shook the ground. The rotor's hum deepened, vibrating into a low, resonant frequency that seemed almost alive, almost sentient. Harris's stomach dropped. The sheer power radiating from the machine was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. Granger muttered under his breath, voice trembling. "I've seen war zones, I've seen advanced weapons, but this is beyond comprehension." Suddenly, the Apache twisted sharply, the wind slamming into a row of parked vehicles, scattering them like toys. Soldiers screamed, shielding their faces. Harris clutched Caldwell, heart pounding, sweat running down her forehead. The colonel froze, eyes wide, every instinct screaming that the situation was precariously balanced on the edge of disaster. Caldwell's voice cut through the chaos. "She's not attacking, she's testing, trust me." For a moment, the helicopter hovered, perfectly still, blades cutting the sunlight into shimmering shards. The tarmac vibrated, debris suspended in the air like a frozen storm. Harris could feel the tension pressing against her chest, a living thing that demanded attention and respect. And then Caldwell whispered, almost to himself, "Hold on, the next move will show them everything." The Apache's blades tilted, the rotor wash intensified, and the machine surged upward in a powerful, controlled lift. Dust, grit, and small debris spun into a cyclone around them. Soldiers screamed, shielding themselves, while the colonel staggered, eyes wide, realizing that whatever was about to happen would define not only the morning, but perhaps the very limits of human-machine interaction. Harris's hands trembled, but Caldwell's grip was steady. "Brace yourselves," he said, voice calm, resolute, "because she's about to show the world what we're capable of together." And with that, the Apache surged forward, spinning, banking, alive in a way no one could have imagined. As the impossible became reality, the Apache surged forward with a force that rattled the base, blades cutting the air into a roaring tempest. Dust, gravel, and debris twisted into a chaotic storm, whipping across the tarmac and striking soldiers who scrambled for cover. Harris clutched Caldwell's arm tightly, heart hammering. She had expected a display, maybe a dramatic hover, but what they were witnessing now was something entirely different. The helicopter moved as if alive, anticipating each micro-movement Caldwell made, responding to instinct and trust rather than levers and switches alone. Colonel Granger staggered back, jaw tight, eyes wide with disbelief. This is insane. She's moving beyond human control. Every law of physics, she's defying them. Caldwell's eyes remained locked on the instruments, hands fluidly dancing across the controls. "Not beyond human control, sir, just human understanding. She's responding to me. That's all that matters." Harris swallowed hard, her pulse racing. She realized how terrifyingly right he was. The Apache wasn't malfunctioning. It wasn't rogue. It was alive in a way that no pilot or engineer could comprehend, and Caldwell was the only one capable of guiding it. The colonel barked, his voice cracking with authority and fear. "Sergeant, I don't care what you call it, bring her down now. You don't have clearance to perform these maneuvers." Caldwell's jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing his weathered face. "Colonel, if I force it down now, she could resist, and if she resists, I can't guarantee anything." Granger's eyes went wide with horror. "Resist, resist. You're telling me this helicopter, this weapon could disobey?" The Apache tilted sharply, rising higher, banking in a perfect arc. Dust and debris whipped violently, gusts of wind threatening to throw anyone off balance. Harris's stomach dropped. She gripped Caldwell, bracing against the force, feeling the raw power radiating from the machine like it had its own heartbeat. "Look at her," Caldwell whispered, voice calm but intense. "She's aware. She's watching. She's feeling the tension in every person here. That's why she's moving like this. Trust me, she won't hurt anyone if I maintain focus." The colonel's face went pale as realization hit. "She's aware of us. She can sense intent." Caldwell nodded slightly. "Exactly. And right now, everyone's fear is feeding her energy. That's why the storm is escalating. That's why she's alive in this moment." Harris's pulse spiked. The helicopter was more than a machine now. It was an extension of Caldwell, a living weapon with judgment, intuition, and power beyond comprehension. The rotor blades hummed in perfect resonance with his movements, slicing sunlight into blinding streaks. The tarmac trembled beneath them, dust and grit swirling in chaotic patterns. Suddenly, the Apache dipped sharply toward the colonel's position. Soldiers shouted and scrambled, shielding themselves instinctively. Harris's heart leapt into her throat. Caldwell's hands moved with lightning speed, adjusting levers and controls, micro-corrections that barely seemed real. The Apache obeyed him perfectly, hovering just above the colonel's head, the wind slamming into his boots. Granger staggered, eyes wide, shouting over the roar. "What the hell? She's almost mocking us. Is this part of the test?" Caldwell didn't respond immediately. His focus was absolute, eyes scanning instruments, hands moving like an extension of his own instincts. The Apache tilted again, banking sharply, sending a shockwave of wind and debris across the base. Soldiers clung to vehicles, helmets blown off, shouting in panic and exhilaration. Harris felt sweat run down her forehead as she braced herself, heart hammering. "Careful," she shouted almost hysterically. "One wrong move, one wrong calculation and—" "Relax," Caldwell cut in, voice calm, commanding. "She's listening, trust me. If I panic, she panics. If I stay calm, we all stay safe." The colonel's gaze darted between Caldwell and the helicopter, realization dawning in terror. You're literally controlling her, with your instincts, your movements, your trust." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "Exactly. And right now, the test isn't about flying. It's about proving that we can maintain control together. If she trusts me, the storm she's creating won't harm anyone." Harris's stomach tightened. She realized the danger, the precision required, the razor-thin margin between control and chaos. The helicopter tilted again, spinning, rising, slicing through the air with perfect fluidity. Dust and debris twisted violently, creating a tornado-like vortex around them. Soldiers screamed, ducking instinctively, eyes wide with fear. Then a sudden high-pitched alarm sounded from the Apache's cockpit. Harris flinched, but Caldwell's hands moved faster, reacting instinctively. The rotor blades tilted, compensating, stabilizing the machine in a breathtaking display of skill and experience. Harris's eyes widened. She realized something terrifying and exhilarating. Caldwell wasn't just controlling the helicopter, he was commanding life itself. The colonel's voice trembled. "I've seen advanced weapons, I've seen combat, but this is beyond anything in my entire career. She's alive, she's aware, and he's controlling her." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "Yes, sir, and now it's time to prove it." The Apache tilted forward, accelerating in a perfect, controlled dive just above the tarmac. Dust, gravel, and debris exploded outward, creating a miniature hurricane. Soldiers scrambled, shielding themselves, while the colonel staggered backward, face pale and strained. Harris's heart leapt into her throat. Then, with a sudden, almost imperceptible movement of Caldwell's hand, the helicopter banked sharply upward, rising higher than anyone expected, spinning in a controlled arc that seemed impossible. The rotor blades hummed, slicing through the sunlight, generating a resonance that vibrated through every bone and muscle. Harris gritted her teeth, feeling her knuckles whiten as she clutched Caldwell. This is insane." He didn't respond, only focused, micro-adjustments ensuring the Apache remained perfectly balanced. The colonel staggered, shouting, eyes wide. "If she miscalculates, one mistake it's—" Before he could finish, the Apache hovered midair, suddenly still, blades slicing the air into shimmering patterns, wind calm around the machine. Harris blinked, realizing the surreal perfection of the moment. Every vibration, every hum, every motion was under Caldwell's control. Then Caldwell whispered, almost reverently, "Hold on, because now she's ready to show everything." The helicopter tilted slightly, and for a moment the tarmac fell silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Harris's stomach dropped. The colonel's eyes widened in awe and fear. They were about to witness the impossible. The Apache hovered above the tarmac, rotors slicing the morning sunlight into glinting arcs, dust settling like a slow-motion storm around them. The base was silent, stunned into reverent awe. Soldiers, faces pale and wide-eyed, clutched at whatever cover remained, watching in disbelief as the helicopter's hum seemed almost alive. A pulsing heartbeat synced perfectly with Caldwell's movements. Harris held his arm tightly, marveling at the impossible display of precision, trust, and control. Colonel Granger staggered backward, jaw tight, eyes wide. He had seen war zones, weapons tests, and high-risk combat exercises, but nothing like this. The machine before him wasn't simply advanced technology. It was a living extension of a man's instincts, his decades of experience distilled into perfection. Caldwell's hands moved fluidly, adjusting levers, twisting knobs, and tapping controls with a grace that defied logic. Every tilt, every bank, Every micro-adjustment coaxed the Apache into movements that were near impossible to achieve. It moved with intelligence, awareness, and a responsiveness that made even the Colonel's seasoned mind reel. She's incredible," Harris whispered almost to herself. She could feel the energy radiating from the machine, a vibration that echoed through the tarmac, reverberated in her chest, and rattled her teeth. "I've never seen anything like this." Granger's voice cracked, a mixture of awe and terror. "Sergeant, I don't even know what to say. This defies every protocol, every rule, every law I've ever followed." Caldwell didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained locked on the instruments, body taut but controlled. Then he slowly exhaled and looked at Harris. "It's not about defying rules, Captain. It's about understanding, trusting, respecting the machine, and knowing it respects you back." The Colonel swallowed hard. "Respects you." Caldwell nodded. "Exactly, she's aware. She can sense fear, hesitation, intent. But she also recognizes skill, focus, and trust, and right now she trusts me." The Apache tilted gently, blades slicing the air in perfect harmony, and hovered silently. The gusts that had threatened to knock soldiers off their feet calmed. Dust settled. The chaos of moments ago seemed like a distant memory, a storm contained by one man's mastery. Harris felt tears prick her eyes. The tension, the fear, the adrenaline, it all culminated into a singular, breathtaking moment of awe. She realized something profound. This wasn't just about flying a helicopter. This was about the bond between human and machine, trust and understanding, and the thin line between control and chaos. The Colonel stepped forward cautiously, voice low and almost reverent. "Sergeant, I don't know how to say this, but you've done the impossible. You've proven that she's not just a machine. She's alive in a way no one has ever imagined." Caldwell's lips pressed into a thin line, a faint smile appearing. "Alive, sir, but only because she trusts me. That's the key: trust, understanding, and respect." Harris nodded, exhaling slowly, her heart finally starting to calm. You've controlled her perfectly, and she listened. Every time, every movement, every test." The Colonel's eyes were wide, glimmering with a mixture of awe and humility. "I've commanded soldiers, tested advanced systems, and reviewed the most sophisticated machines in the world. But what you've done, I can't even describe it. This changes everything." Caldwell's hands relaxed, guiding the Apache gently down to the tarmac. The helicopter's blades slowed, humming a softer, almost melodic rhythm as it settled. Dust settled, debris stilled, and silence fell over the base, broken only by the soft hiss of hydraulics. Harris finally let go, stepping back, heart still racing. She looked at Caldwell, at the machine, and then at the Colonel, who simply shook his head, unable to articulate the awe, the fear, and the respect that filled the air. Caldwell climbed out of the cockpit slowly, every movement deliberate, calm, collected. Harris followed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "All of it." He nodded, glancing at the Apache. "She did most of it herself. I just guided her. That's the difference. Respect, trust, and patience. That's all it takes." The Colonel finally found his voice, steady but filled with emotion. "Sergeant Caldwell, you've just rewritten the rules. Not just for flying, not just for machines, but for everything we thought we knew about control, trust, and partnership." Caldwell's gaze returned to the Apache, eyes softening. "She's not just a machine, Colonel, and she never will be. But she's ours, our legacy if we're careful. And if we respect her, she'll protect us as we protect her." Harris glanced around at the soldiers, at the tarmac still scattered with debris, at the silent, humming machine. She realized something monumental. This moment would be remembered not for the chaos, the fear, or the danger, but for the demonstration of harmony between human skill and machine potential. A bond forged in trust, mastery, and courage. The Colonel exhaled, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. "Sergeant, I don't know if anyone else could have done what you just did. You've earned something today, something that will be remembered." Caldwell nodded once quietly. "We all earned it, sir." She listened because we respected her. The sun broke through the dust clouds, sunlight glinting off the Apache's rotors, illuminating a scene of calm after storm. Soldiers cautiously rose, awestruck, whispering among themselves. The base felt alive with possibility, the impossible made real before their eyes. Harris looked at Caldwell, feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. "So, that was it?" she asked. He smiled faintly, eyes soft but thoughtful. "For now, but she's only just begun to show what she can do, and I'll be here to make sure we both survive the next step." The colonel shook his head, still staring at the helicopter. I don't, I'll never understand it, but I know this, you've just changed everything we thought was possible." Caldwell's gaze swept over the tarmac, the soldiers, and finally the Apache. "That's the thing about impossible things," he said softly. "They only seem impossible until someone earns the right to prove otherwise." The helicopter's blade slowed further, the hum softening into a gentle whisper, like a living heartbeat finally at rest. Dust settled, debris stilled, and a quiet awe fell over the base. Every eye, every mind, every heart carried the memory of what had just occurred, a demonstration of mastery, trust, and courage that none would ever forget. And as Caldwell stepped away from the cockpit, shoulders relaxed, Harris realized the truth. Some moments are so extraordinary, so impossible, that they redefine everything that comes after. And this would echo through history. The Apache remained on the tarmac, silent yet alive, a testament to human skill, trust, and the thin, breathtaking line between man and machine. And in that moment, everyone knew nothing would ever be the same again.